Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Russia unleashes its biggest drone attack on Ukraine as Zelensky travels to meet the Pope and calls for tougher sanctions. No breakthrough in Gaza ceasefire talks as Netanyahu wraps up a third White House meeting with Trump and US envoy delays Doha trip. And Taliban tourism. Afghans invite US visitors to travel to the region via an online video going viral across social media. Now, Russia has launched its largest drone strike yet on Ukraine, targeting cities across the country, including Kyiv and Luhansk, with more than 700 drones and missiles. Ukraine says the scale of the attack proves the need for tougher sanctions, especially on Russian oil. It comes as President Donald Trump confirmed the US would send weapons to Ukraine and called out President Putin. Take a listen.
That was a war that should have never happened, and a lot of people are dying, and it should end. And I don't know, we get a lot of thrown at us by Putin. For you want to know the truth, he's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by correspondent and columnist Gemma White and Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes. Jono, let's start with you. So we heard from Donald Trump there some choice language when he was talking about Vladimir Putin, but Russia has sort of turbocharged its attack on Ukraine, and that was the early hours of this morning, Wednesday morning. Is this all down to those comments from Donald Trump? Did it cause a retaliation from Vladimir Putin?
Although it seems that way on the surface, experts are saying that it requires a lot of time, a lot of effort to put into this as well. We're looking at 728 drones, and quite a number of those were intercepted, 13 missiles as well. And something on that scale requires weeks of preparation in advance. So it's unlikely that this is a knee-jerk reaction to Donald Trump's comments. Now, obviously, this is now causing confusion. The US position will be rechecked once again because Russia could see this as an opportunity to escalate what's happening in Ukraine. Eyes have been off of Ukraine for just a while because we've been dealing with the peace talks between Netanyahu and Donald Trump. So experts will say otherwise, although on the surface of it, yes, it does kind of look like it's a knee-jerk reaction, but it will have taken many, many weeks of planning in order to be able to actually execute an attack on this scale. And I think it's been done intentionally. I think it's to try and get eyes back once again to reassert dominance and say, have you forgotten that this is also still something that's going on? And Trump seems to be taking no prisoners when it comes to his comments about Putin as well. And a much harder stance is what we're seeing this time around.
And he has criticised Putin before. After the phone call they recently had, he said that he wasn't happy with that phone call. So Donald Trump is all of a sudden like changing the rhetoric towards Russia. We saw him being tougher on Ukraine in the past. But Gemma, I guess some good news out of this, if you want to look at it for Ukraine, the US confirmed it's sending more weapons to Ukraine. Wow, this is a massive U-turn from the Trump administration.
Yes, it is good news, but it's not without its controversy and sort of scandal and haphazardness, really. So there's been a big U-turn. Obviously, the US had pressed pause on sending weapons to Ukraine. Now, unfortunately, no one told Donald Trump that this was happening. So there's been a big public U-turn, and it looks at the moment like the White House doesn't know what's going on. It looks like Trump doesn't know what's going on in his own administration. So what happened is, on Monday at a press conference, Trump said, we're going to send some more weapons. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard. By Tuesday, and behind him, Defence Secretary Hegseth was nodding along. Now, by Tuesday, during a cabinet meeting, Trump was asked whether he authorised the temporary stopping of weapons to Ukraine. And he was visibly annoyed by this question. And he said, I don't know, why don't you tell me? Now, sources from the White House have said he had no knowledge of Hegseth pausing the shipments to Ukraine. Now, this is the second time that Hegseth has done it. This year. The first time was in February. And they're using the same excuse or reason. Now, their reason is that US stockpiles are low because of, obviously they're exporting to Israel and also Ukraine. But the Democrat, Adam Smith, he's the Washington, he's a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and he said, we are not at any lower point stockpile-wise than we've been in the last 3.5 years in the Ukraine conflict. So conflicting information there, but conflicting information in Trump's own cabinet.
And I think this is where some of the concern comes in. It comes in right now. It's summertime. We've seen Russia and Ukraine upping the ante. When it comes to the war that's happening, we always hear about a summer offensive. But also when just having a look at the weapons that the US will be sending, it's defensive weapons yet again.
Yeah.
And I feel like, the rhetoric we're hearing from Donald Trump, and we've been hearing from the European leaders, is Trump has to realise, and maybe is realising, and the European leaders have realised, diplomacy is just not working with Vladimir Putin. So are we going to see just defensive weapons go in to Ukraine, or does it have to be a shift?
I don't think we're going to see an on-ground offensive from the US's point of view in the near future on this. But for sure, I think we do need to see the strength and power is what Russia responds to over diplomacy. And we've seen that happen time and time again. And I think without this show of strength and this show of power, and Trump saying, you know what, this is what we can do. We can send the missiles over. We can help them out a lot. Without actually doing that, I don't think Russia's going to listen. They are autocratic in their own way, and that's how they manage things, and that's probably what they respond best to, is a show of strength and a show of power, which I think is what Trump is now trying to place upon Putin to try and get some sort of a reaction.
And what's interesting is I also spoke to a Ukrainian MP a little bit earlier, Oleksiy Goncharenko. He said Ukraine must fight on as Russia only understands strength, just what you were saying there, Jono. Let's have a quick listen to what he had to say.
We know Russians better than anybody else in the world, unfortunately. And I can tell you, Russia understands only one language of force, language of strength, nothing else. So if you want to have diplomacy with Russia, first you should punch them. President Trump tried to do another way. And what is the result? Half a year after, no results. Putin continues the war, increasing his attacks, and he is just humiliating the United States and President Trump. That's it. So before Putin will be punched, no real diplomacy will happen. I want diplomacy. I want this war. Ukraine agreed from March, on unconditional ceasefire. We're ready any minute. The hostilities can stop today. The only obstacle is President Putin.
The only obstacle is President Putin. Russia needs to be punched in the face. Pretty strong words coming out of that Ukrainian MP there. I do wonder, now we're getting an escalation in, Trump's rhetoric and an escalation in the war. It seems to be like
where we started,
changed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we're back in 2022.
Yeah.
Same old problems. Trump, I think he often thinks he's getting somewhere, and then Putin just, reverts to type and goes off and does what he was always going to do in the first place. And I'm wondering if Trump will learn actually from this, because he keeps giving him chances and chances.
Yeah.
But I wonder if this might be the final straw.
And I think Europe will also probably get into play here very quickly. And we know we've heard Germany already saying, you'd mentioned this earlier on, that Germany were looking at ways that they could potentially supply the weapons through to Ukraine. But this attack is very close to a city called Lutsk, which is about 90 kilometres away from the Polish border. So we're very close to EU territory at this stage.
And they did scramble jets at one point. We have seen Poland and other Eastern European countries in that sort of flank have to do those things as protection for themselves. But it's a really interesting conversation because, like you said, it almost feels like we're back at the beginning and there needs to be movement forward. Donald Trump said he could end this in 24 hours. that is clearly a very difficult timeline to obviously stick to. But thank you so much for your thoughts there. And stay right there as we move on to another story. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has quietly wrapped up a second day of White House talks with President Trump without any announcement of progress on a Gaza ceasefire deal. Hopes of a breakthrough have grown after the meeting was added to Netanyahu's schedule at the last minute, but no public statement followed. Meanwhile, US envoy Steve Witkoff has delayed his trip to Doha, signalling that negotiations do remain far from finalised. Right, so another situation a little bit, Gemma, where everything seemed to be really positive, cautious optimism. We heard a lot, didn't we, at the beginning of the week? We originally thought Netanyahu would be staying in Washington, D.C. until tomorrow, and yet he's gone already and gone with nothing.
Yep.
He hasn't done a victory lap over the ceasefire deal. It's all gone a bit quiet.
I think all these meetings between Trump and Netanyahu gave everyone sort of false hope. And I do think Trump does stoke that because he wants the win. So he does kind of allow you to believe that they're this close all the time to solving it and finding solutions. And that's simply not the case. So, yeah, negotiations have broken down after 3 days. And what I think we have to remember is that these are indirect talks. So between the Israelis and Hamas, so they're just talking to each other through the Qataris. One can only imagine the repetitiveness back and forth. Now, some of the main points they can't agree on is the distribution of aid during the ceasefire and this one sticking point which Netanyahu is never going to agree to, which is the Israeli troop withdrawals, which Hamas are not sort of relinquishing. They're not taking off the table. Now, interesting, Witkoff earlier this week had said we have 4 issues and now we're down to 1. We're not down to 1, absolutely not. That is pie in the sky. So I think what's interesting as well for me is that on Wednesday, so yesterday, Netanyahu was talking about the latest meeting. He talks a lot about the hostages. He really does make that the focal point, obviously, and it is utmost important to bring them back. But he said the release of all our hostages, the living and the deceased, and the elimination of Hamas's military and governing capabilities, thereby ensuring that Gaza will never again constitute a threat to Israel. Now, that is an incredibly open line, because what does Israel consider constitutes a threat to them? It could be absolutely anything. And so I don't see any doors closing here at all, just more seem to be opening.
Yeah, and once again, I feel like we have a lot of talks about talks, and we've had a lot of fragile ceasefires. You know, we're going to get there, we haven't quite got there. And, you know, Jono, I feel like we had that ceasefire when Donald Trump first came into office, and then the timelines keep on moving. Right, we'll hear back from Hamas in 24 hours. We didn't. Now we see a timeline moving again, the end of this week. That appears elusive. And of course, Trump's US Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, he's been sort of instrumental in a lot of these talks, has delayed his trip to Doha. And what does this mean for negotiations once again?
Well, 2 sides to the coin here. One is that, and this is the story that will be portrayed, is that there's a critical point that they can't get past, and they've said it's 1, and I think Gemma is correct in this one. I think there's probably more than 1. There's probably a lot of cards on the table that have not been quite sorted just yet. It would indicate that because that crux is still there, that we haven't got past the barrier of that one remaining issue. So the talks have been done remotely. They are, as we said, indirect talks that are being done remotely at the moment. The physical presence will be required when a breakthrough happens. And the question now is, when is that breakthrough going to happen? Because we've not been given a date. We know that he's been moved. He's not going to Doha. But when is he going to Doha? That we don't know yet. So it's either we're pausing because we don't have the issues resolved, it's a strategic move, and that's what they're trying to portray, that we're waiting for the conditions to be just right before the level of presence is required in Doha. Or we're on the opposite side. We saw Netanyahu leave the White House a day ahead of what was planned from Thursday. He's now left today. Does that mean that we're no closer to a deal than we were at the very start of the week, which is a concern, but I think it's definitely something that we need to look at as something that may be a possibility.
And what is also a concern is the IDF is increasing tempo of attacks on Gaza, and we have seen that. And that is another concern, because even though these talks are happening, we've spoken about this before, the hostages are not coming home, aid is not being distributed correctly across Gaza, and the fighting continues. So it seems that there needs to be a resolution at some point, because the more and more we talk, the longer and longer the suffering goes on for everybody involved, for Israel and for Gaza.
I just think it's those, there's the certain breakpoints that both parties are very unwilling to move on. I don't see Netanyahu pulling all troops out of Gaza. I really don't see that happening.
The sticking points have stayed the same.
The sticking points have been the same.
Yeah.
And Hamas still want some sort of control, so they're not going to disarm and they're not going to move out. That's another thing.
Aside from diplomatic chaos, once the hostages are released, they really don't have anything else as their bargaining tool. So I think they're the two things that both parties will stick on. And I figure that was a very tight conversation that's gone on in the last couple of days in the White House. And a bit of openness wouldn't go astray here. When exactly we can expect to see Steve Witkoff in Doha is going to be the big change here. And then we maybe will know at what point we can look at a potential deal, or a conversation that says that no deal has been reached or no deal can be reached.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even a conversation on more aid going into Gaza at the time when these talks are happening, because aid has been another massive sticking point. You know, Hamas do not want the GHF to be controlling aid when a ceasefire is reached. They want the UN and the other recognised NGOs to go in and distribute aid properly. So I think there's a whole lot of different moving pieces here. But at least I guess Donald Trump's getting everyone talking, you know, getting Netanyahu to Washington, D.C. and getting Hamas in indirect talks with Israel in Doha. But we never know. We never know. Like you said, we could possibly see a deal by Friday. I mean, anything's possible, I think, sometimes.
Do you think as well, like, I do find that Trump, when he speaks directly, he will say, oh, the talks perhaps didn't go as I imagined, or, you know, he can be quite honest in that respect. So I think when he comes out and talks about, you know, these meetings they've had, he doesn't tend to lie, I don't think. He's quite honest. He'll say, it went like I expected, it didn't go as I expected, you know, so he'll be another barometer of finding out.
And I think what's always interesting is, you know, you watch those cabinet meetings in the White House and it's like nothing I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
It's 2 hours long and Donald Trump just fields questions from everyone. And I often think, you know, when it came to the Ukraine weapons situation, he's very honest.
Yeah.
And that's something that we don't often see.
I mean, we can hope there's honesty in this as well, because we do want to know what's going on. But I think we may be waiting a while to find out what really was the conversation that happened behind closed doors. And we can only hope that by Friday we have some movement forward, be it Steve Witkoff on the ground or not. Some movement forward is what we require.
Yeah, let's wait and see. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Now let's move on to another story. And an Afghanistan tourism video originally posted by the Taliban on X has gone viral on social media this week, causing global debate. The 1 minute long clip features a Taliban fighter smiling whilst holding rifles with the Afghan countryside in the background. Locals say they want to reband the war-torn country and entice adventurous travellers to the region. Okay, Jono, we can actually see that video right now. It's being played on our screen. Wow, okay.
Look,
it's doing the rounds on social media. There it is, you know, everyone looking quite happy. Could it entice US tourists to Afghanistan?
It really depends. I honestly thought that looking at this initially that this is AI. I thought this is surely not real. And to find out that it is even more terrifying, isn't it? Obviously, there's the safety concerns with any American tourist heading to Afghanistan right now, and it's still been red listed for many countries across the globe for tourism to go towards Taliban. The reputation as well, an American choosing to go to Taliban country, and basically the public backlash would be phenomenal. Now, I'm not saying there's not people out there who would be keen to do this, and there's not a demand, because if there wasn't, we wouldn't be seeing videos like this. But the Taliban is, as we know, not internationally recognised as stable. It's not seen as a safe governing body. So this is definitely risky territory for those who are willing to take that risk and to jump on board. And it's a total mismatch on what tourism videos are normally. We normally see sweeping landscapes, beautiful backgrounds, incredible sights and sounds, and a reason to go and visit. So this is a totally different take. There's no culture being focused on here. There's no nature or hospitality. This simply is a parade of violence, is what we're seeing. And there is probably a market for it, which is more concerning than anything else. People will probably sign up for this if it is an option, and that terrifies me no end.
And it's quite interesting because the US travel advisory for Afghanistan remains at level 4, do not travel. We know that the UK and many other countries have the same travel ban in place. So once again, it seems to be something that they're touting, but people can't travel there. And I was just wondering, Gemma, you know, recently we saw Kim Jong-un, of course, the leader of North Korea, and he was promoting a new beach resort in the country. Trump and Netanyahu have spoken about the Gaza Riviera. We've heard that too. Does this all feel really distasteful? Or is there genuine interest for people, like you say, maybe extreme tourism?
Do you know what, as well, you get in tourist videos from other countries? Women.
Yeah,
apparently, there's no women in Afghanistan. They're absolutely not represented there, which is probably the biggest red flag that we have going on.
Yeah.
So, according to Business Insider, nearly 14,500 foreigners have visited Afghanistan since the Taliban took over, mainly from Russia, China, Turkey, and some Middle Eastern countries as well. So, is there a market? Yes, there is. The data suggests these are thrill-seeking influencers and vloggers. Now, thrill-seeking, I think they sort of spelt sort of death wish wrong there, to be honest, for me. I think it's very much done for the clout on social media. It's done for the gram, it's done for the likes, it's done for, you know, the sheer amount of attention you would get if you watched this video and then you went on holiday to Afghanistan. Now, for me personally, I've been thinking about this, and I think it's quite a generational thing. Now, I was thinking about 9/11, which is 2001. Now, the people who were born in that year would now be 24, or even if they were sort of, you know, 5 or 6 in that year, they would now be 30. And they didn't grow up with the rhetoric around the Taliban the older generations grew up with. And so for them, it's perhaps not in their memories or their psyches what these people did, what the Taliban is responsible for. They are responsible for murder, they are responsible for mass rape, they are responsible for torture, public beheadings. And some funny video that we can all laugh about on social media, I don't find it entertaining. I find it quite horrifying.
And, you know, it's quite interesting because even now in Afghanistan, there's big questions. You mentioned women there, you know, women being able to study, women being able to work, you know, have those rights being taken away after the withdrawal of the US, and obviously Afghanistan fell back into the hands of the Taliban. But it's actually a fascinating thing, because I do think it is generational, because obviously we had a very different take on the war in Afghanistan, and it was very much in our mind. Do you remember, it was just almost rolling TV at some part of our lives?
What I do think is that they're playing into what their strengths are, because if you look at Afghanistan overall, what's the first thing that pops into your head? It's not the Minaret of Jam, beautiful historical UNESCO heritage site in Afghanistan. That's not something that pops into your mind. What pops into your mind is pictures like what we've just seen, videos like what we've just seen, and it's playing into this. And I do think there is a market, and I do. Even someone like myself, I've been to Chernobyl. I go to catacombs. I go to things that are quite dark in terms of tourism, because I enjoy that. There has got to be a market out there for people who want to go to war-torn countries to see what the regime was, still is arguably, and what they did. Because in France, there's a company called Ultimi Reality, which offers you packages and immersive experiences for thrill seekers like this, but it is all staged. They've got kidnapping packages where they will abduct you.
Why don't you just go bungee jumping?
Well, and I think for some people it's something different. Exactly the same thing as why would you want to go to Chernobyl? Why would you go to somewhere which is heavily radioactive? Because it's, and I've been to Auschwitz. Why would you want to go to somewhere like that? Because it plays into the mind, and it's something that you knew about. And I think that's what people will go. The kidnapping packages that they offer, you can have ransom notes and everything, the whole 9 yards. And even an extreme package where you wake up on a table in a morgue surrounded by dead bodies. And people are signing up for this in their droves, because there is an underbelly, an undercurrent of which I am somewhat part of, if you take into consideration that I enjoy dark tourism, where there are people out there who definitely will sign up to go to Afghanistan.
But if you go to Afghanistan, you get kidnapped for real, which is a whole other...
It's a concern, but and they do this in DRC as well. They've done these for quite a number of years, where they'll pseudo-simulate kidnappings, mainly to train you how to deal with a real-life situation. And it's somewhat of an SAS training kind of a program that they'll send you on. So
I've been to the Congo, and that didn't happen to me. We lived on the border for Congo for a long time. So I've arguably lived in quite dangerous countries, you know, across southern Africa. And I always think it's really strange because often when you get there and you live there, you don't realise.
Yeah.
And I wonder if this is what's happening with the tourism. You know, you get there and the extent of things isn't realised, if that makes sense. And maybe you're right, they're trying to play into what they've got.
Yeah.
But with a mocking up of a beheading video.
I know.
There's leaning into what you're known for.
Yeah.
And then there is that completely different kettle of fish.
And you could argue that they may not know any different. They may think that this is a good idea. That may have been portrayed by somebody in the tourism board of Afghanistan, of which I'm sure there is very few members. They may have said that this is a good idea, let's play into this. They may not know any different, and that genuinely may be the modus operandi behind the entire video.
That's a real insight then, isn't it, into how they see themselves and how they want to project themselves to the world.
And it will be fascinating to see if anyone actually takes them up on the offer, and we'll see more likes and clicks on Instagram, as you said, you know, generational thing. But let's move on to another story, and the Bayeux Tapestry, the 70-metre historical artwork depicting the Norman conquest in 1966, will go on display in London's British Museum next year. The 11th century piece is on loan to the UK from France. French President Emmanuel Macron made the announcement during his state visit to Britain. And here's a reminder of just what Macron had to say.
In the run-up to the 1000th anniversary of the birth of William the Conqueror, France will loan the United Kingdom the Bayeux Tapestry. I have to say it took probably more years to deliver this project than all the Brexit texts. Because we launched it together with Prime Minister Theresa May at that time, during not a state visit, but a summit a few years ago. But at the end of the day, we did it.
In case there's any historians watching, I got the date wrong. I said 1966, but it was 1066. So I do apologise. That was a misread on my behalf there. But Gemma, there we are, Macron. He was looking quite smiley, cracking a few jokes. Yeah, he's cute. We like Macron. Well, Gemma does, I don't really. But what do you make of Macron's announcement and loan of this tapestry?
Well, I mean, as far as taking a gift with you goes, it's pretty impressive. You know, most people
didn't
turn
pack
up.
it in a suitcase.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be.
And I've got you this, exactly.
Out of thy hand luggage. You know?
Most people bring chocolates or some flowers. No, he's turned up with this, you know, 11th century tapestry. And what I very much enjoyed about this, whether he intended it or not, I mean, obviously the Bayeux Tapestry depicts the Norman invasion of Britain, so like a French military battle, a victory as well. And he's like, here you go, please display this in the country that we invaded and defeated. So, you know, fair play, Macron, I respect it. Obviously, in exchange, Britain is sending some treasures to France as well. So I feel that this visit by Macron, which is the first state visit by a European leader post-Brexit, it really is solidifying the relationship between France and the UK. We talk a lot and we hear a lot about the special relationship between the US and the UK, but we do overlook the fact that France is Britain's closest neighbours in Europe, one of their oldest allies, and I do feel that this visit, and especially his relationship with Starmer, because he famously didn't have a great relationship with Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. Yeah, sure. I really feel that this is solidifying a relationship. All the rhetoric around it has been very positive. Everyone seems to be on the same page. I think it's a really good visit. I think they're going to get a lot out of it.
what I thought was interesting is he also has a good relationship with King Charles, Emmanuel Macron. And we obviously saw that he had this state visit. He went to Windsor Castle. He went on the carriage around Windsor Castle. You know, he had the big banquet, and we saw Kate and William.
They went to the airport to pick them up.
They went to the airport to pick them up. And I mean, when we talk about relationships, it's the soft power of the royals. And of course, Donald Trump will be making his state visit too, coming up soon. But I think that the diplomacy, and when it comes to gifts, Jono, is just fabulous.
And there's a long history of it. But I think what this one is what we're seeing here is that the UK needs France, and France needs the UK as well. And there's obviously the huge issue of migration, which is to the fore as well. I know we mentioned this yesterday with the figures up 48% on this time last year of the number of migrants crossing the Channel. And the direct link, we forget that there's a direct land link in the Channel tunnel between both parties. They certainly should have more of a synergy between both. And I think we're trying to recreate that back again. And I think it's correct. It's what you said, Gemma. The US and the UK ties, although they are there, we have to remember that the tariffs are still looming over. And I think they need each other. France needs UK just as much.
And I think the UK needs to find out where it sits in the post-Brexit world, because I think that was kind of unclear, you know, under the last Tory government. And obviously Donald Trump's come in, America First agenda. So we do see that shift, like Britain trying to find its place back within that European
Macron
Union.
did talk about how, like, he was one of the most disappointed over Brexit. He expressed how personally upsetting he found it. And so the fact that we're now sort of making jokes about it, I think, okay, that's okay.
It's been enough time.
We've not-
long enough.
And I think we have to do this exchange of tapestries and any other treasures we can find, because not long left for Macron in office. And if the media is to be believed, and certainly the opinion polls, Keir Starmer may not be too far behind him, if not before him at this stage. But there's been a long history of gifts back and forth from various different countries to dignitaries as well. But some of them really stand out as ones that you just think, my goodness, who made the decision? And this is back in 1986. George W. Bush received a gift from Indonesia, which was a Komodo dragon, which ended up in Cincinnati in a zoo and birthed 30 babies.
Didn't end up in the Oval Office.
Did not. But France have got a relatively poor history when it comes to either being given gifts or receiving gifts. In 1826, they received a gift of Zarafa, who was a giraffe from Egypt as well. 10,000 people came to look at that giraffe, because it had never been seen before in France. And then also President Obama received a recycled grocery bag from France. One of the first ones that had been made, because now obviously that's the go-to.
That would have been cutting edge, maybe.
Yes, it was new at the time. Very bland gift to receive. The UK did slightly better on a gift to the US at that time, and they gave a ping pong table, which ironically had been made in China. And then Stalin famously sent North Korea's Kim Il-sung at the time a bulletproof limo, very useful, along with some gifts for him to put into the North Korea Museum, which included a VHS of the movie classic Space Jam and an album from Icelandic singer-songwriter Björk.
Oh, wow.
I like Björk.
It's almost an anti-gift, I think.
She wore the swan.
Yeah, see.
That was controversial. But one thing I do love is I've always liked China's panda diplomacy. You know, we've seen lots of pandas in various zoos, of course, around the world, and that's because China's diplomacy is often pandas. Also, Japan, it's dogs. You know, they've got the Akita dogs. And then Russia, it's cats. So there's lots of different things. But I do love this one. I'm going to read it out. Obama gave Gordon Brown, apparently, you know, who was the UK Prime Minister at the time, 25 DVDs of classic American films on a visit. But apparently that they use different region codes.
Yeah, different DVD players, yes.
Yeah, so Gordon Brown couldn't even watch the 25 videos that Barack Obama had given him. So that was a bit sad, isn't it?
Some assistant did not do their research there.
No, what if they just pulled them off the shelf
Exactly.
and stuck them in the bag? Yeah.
We forgot to get Gordon Brown something.
What was the return gift? Because there has to be one in return as well.
Yeah, the Gordon Brown had actually been incredibly thoughtful with the gift that he'd given Obama. Now, what he did is it was an ornamental pen holder made from the timbers of the Victorian anti-slave ship HMS Gannet. Wow. Now, HMS Gannet was the sister ship to HMS Resolute, and Resolute was the desk in the Oval Office is called the Resolute desk because it was made from the timbers of that ship. So That was a very thoughtful, very well thought out, very well planned gift, and then he got a load of DVDs.
Wow.
And couldn't watch.
Yeah, what a terrible exchange.
Oh
of
my
gifts.
gosh, I would have been mad.
You have to do that face, don't
upset.
you, when you
Yeah.
get that gift? I wonder if he faked the face. You know?
Yeah, I
Oh,
know.
That's great,
I know.
Obama. Thank you.
Thank you. And here's like a whole art piece. But I do love the diplomacy of things. And you know, sometimes, like, we forget that the Liberty...
Statue of
That
Liberty.
Statue of
Yeah.
Liberty, of course, it's from France.
Yeah.
And so many times you walk around these big cities, in London too, and you know, a lot of the statues have been given,
Yeah.
and they've been amazing gifts. And sometimes we forget that countries have these things going on. And finally, Jono and Gemma, you've come up, not me, with a couple of quirky stories of the day. And Jono, yours is about Percy the peacock. He's
is.
causing absolute chaos.
He's a menace.
Chaos.
He's a menace, in fact. A quiet town in Wiltshire is currently under siege, not by any burglar, but by a peacock who is called Percy. Now, Percy is up and about every morning at 4:30, and he is mating out loud. His mating call out loud has been what's waking the neighbourhood up. He kicks off every day as a menace, and the entire neighbourhood is now up in arms because he is tearing through vegetable patches like some sort of a feathered tornado. Locals say he's got a taste for lettuce, courgette and runner beans, and he's not shy about trampling gardens to get to them. He's even claimed some rooftops as his own territory, which means he'll stay there for the entire morning for about 4 hours solid at his personal stage, and he will just continue to make the noise. The noise a peacock makes is quite ear-piercing. And his loud efforts seem that it's due to a lack of love in his life.
Oh.
He's on the rooftop calling out for a love
yes.
that is not coming.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's got tatty tail feathers, which means that he's got poorer chances at finding love.
But why can't they buy him a lady peacock?
They should.
I think it's perhaps he maybe past his prime, and I think it's that may be the issue.
Well, he's not if he's still
An elderly
calling
lady
out.
peacock.
Yeah, I don't know if you need to add
elderly
another
lady.
peacock into a situation. It's already a drama. There's no need to do it.
But we feel sorry for Percy.
And locals are worried because they're concerned that maybe perhaps the peacock could go rogue at some stage and attack them, because he seems quite vindictive based upon nothing whatsoever aside from his facial
Do
expression.
you know that the crows attack you in Dubai?
Crows attack you in general. That's just their
Yeah,
thing.
but you know, there's a
Nesting
mating season, nesting
Yeah.
season. Yeah, they dive bomb you.
Well, the good news is there's been no recorded at least,
Okay.
official global statistics on any peacock-related fatalities, or in fact crows for that matter. A bird has never killed a person who has not been an ostrich or a capybara. So in India in July 2021, a 24-year-old man died when a peacock flew into his head while he was riding a scooter, which is indirectly causing him to crash, which is the reason of the peacock. And also an aggressive peacock attacked a 3-year-old at a zoo in 2020 as well, but the fatal outcomes are pretty much almost non-existent.
Oh, well, that's good news. But I still wish that Percy had a little mate and stopped raiding the vegetable gardens. That is annoying. You know, can you imagine you've been doing all your vegetable
The
beds?
town loves him enough to have named him.
Yeah, that's true.
Someone's going to want to take him
I mean,
in.
everything that's
Justice for
infamous.
Percy.
Just because you've named something, it doesn't mean it's any less infamous. Jack the Ripper was given a name, and he was certainly not a character that was liked by the locals.
Don't want him staying in my vegetable
Exactly.
garden
No,
either.
absolutely. But you know, a little bit of peacock love for him. Oh, shame. Okay, anyway, let's move on. And Gemma, talk about obviously looking for love and
Yes.
Percy being absolutely desperate. This is the whole other end of the spectrum. The best breakup strategy
Yes.
has been revealed. Let's have a look. What does the study say?
So there's a study just carried out in Cyprus, and they identified 45 specific breakup behaviours.
That's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, sort of ranging from ghosting to it's not me, it's you. No, I've got that the wrong way around.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be it's not
me,
you, it's me.
Me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The classic. Now, I think there's a lot of lying being going on in this study. I don't mind telling you, because of all the people interviewed,
Right.
researched, 86% of them said that when they break up with someone, they use the soften the blow approach. You know, I'm so sorry. Here's some. They say they're completely honest. They say they just try and do something that is not painful. Now, if I listen to my friends' breakups who are out there dating, most of them say they get ghosted, and
Yeah.
that is not a soften the blow
Or
situation.
they get
Ghosted
cheated
or,
on.
ghosted or cheating.
Cheated
That's
on.
the two.
Ghosted or
Yeah,
cheating.
yeah, that's what I
But
always
apparently
hear.
86% of people think that they are great at breaking up, and they're very kind and loving when they do it. Now, the second approach is the take a break. You know, we should take a break for a while. That was 24% of people said they did that. And finally, liars. The avoid, maybe the avoid confrontation, 16%. Maybe that's the ghosting brigade, actually.
Yeah,
That could be it,
they
yeah.
aren't lying. Yeah, okay.
But I think it's much higher than 16%.
I think it's much higher. I think I think we should reverse this. I think it should be 86%, avoid confrontation.
Do you remember, was it Gwyneth Paltrow who said we're consciously uncoupling?
Uncoupling.
Yes.
Do you remember
He's
that?
used that again as well. Chris Martin loves that phrase.
Consciously uncoupling.
Big fan of using that, yes. Big fan of that phrase.
But I do think it's quite interesting because I would agree. I don't think this is true.
No. And again, I think cheating is probably higher. Ghosting's the top one. And then running the country. That seems to be the new thing to do now. Some people are doing it. Just jumping the country and drop a message.
Running
saying,
the country?
Sorry, I've left.
Running from the country.
It's happened to friends of mine, and statistically speaking, within my circle of friends, that makes it 30% of my friends have had their partner run out on them and jump the country.
Good Lord.
Yeah,
No one's admitting to that in this
No, it's not in this
research.
survey.
No, exactly.
No.
They're all wonderful at breaking up with people. They're the kindest breakers uppers in the world.
Let's be honest, it's always a really tough conversation to have. So sometimes people would ghost because they don't want to have that conversation. But always remember, if you're going to do that, to try and give that person some closure. Love advice from Leigh-Ann here.
The show has taken a turn.
Yes, it's taken a turn. I've all of a sudden become nice. Thanks to today's guest, correspondent and columnist Gemma White, and Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you for watching.